Hello, this is Peter Bell, and I'm here with Mr. Don Lay with Medallion Resources. Hello, Don.
Hello, Peter.
November 20th, 2018, and there's news out from the company. Medallion completes key rare earth production test. Congratulations.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. It was a big and important step for the company.
Yeah, and rare earth salts played a instrumental role, really, in doing this work.
Yeah, in the rare earth business, the rare earths themselves are a variety of different elements, and to be marketable commodities, they have to be separated. So our business is to extract the rare earths from monazite, a byproduct mineral that we acquire, and then we hand off a concentrate that contains all the rare earths to another party, a refiner or separation company that does that separation. And Rare Earth Salts is a company based in Nebraska that's got a novel technology to separate rare earths, and they have a refinery down there. Earlier this year, we had extracted rare earths from monazite sand in Saskatchewan with the Saskatchewan Research Council, our technical partner, and sent that concentrate down to Rare Earth Salts. They then put that through its paces and separated our concentrate into the individual rare earth oxides with the marketable commodities. So it was a big step to pass, and that's what we announced today.
Well, and a few steps even there. You speak of what happened in Saskatchewan, government-related research entity, as I understand it.
Yeah, the Research Council's a Crown corporation, and they operate on a sort of a break-even basis, and they've been around for 50 or 60 years. Well recognized for their metallurgy and experience in uranium as well as rare earths as well, and so they're really doing the bulk of the test work for us.
Yeah,
and so they completed that work, and we got that.
And that's it. And they sent the output of their work is what went to Rare Earth Salts.
That's right. Yeah, exactly right.
So
and then Rare Earth Salts kind of completes the value chain by separating the rare earths into the different oxides, which can then be sold on the marketplace or through contracts.
Well, and the potential to have Rare Earth Salt doing some of the heavy lifting with the selling, also very significant.
Yes, that's a good point, Peter. A lot of people sort of are sometimes under the impression that once you produce a product, then people will automatically buy it, and that, of course, isn't quite the case. If you produce an ounce of pure gold, sure, there's a big and liquid market for it. But things like rare earth oxides, even though there's a marketplace, you got to find customers to pick up your product. And Rare Earth Salts has really been working for a number of years on cultivated customers, sending out sample products for qualification, because large companies, when they want to buy, say, neodymium oxide for magnet making for electric vehicles or whatever, they want to make sure you've got an on-spec product and it's available in quantity for a number of years before they commit to production. So that Rare Earth Salts really looks after that part of the value chain for us, which is critical.
And those relationships and quality of product is essential. Just imagining a permanent magnet that wasn't quite as permanent as it should be, that could potentially be catastrophic. And
yeah, I mean, the big car manufacturers or other people that use these magnets, and it could be General Electric in their wind turbines or Siemens, and they wouldn't actually put a magnet that wasn't on spec into one of their devices. So all that testing and all that assurance needs to come months and years ahead of the actual production of the final product.
Yeah, great. And all of the the competition within the industry there can get pretty fierce, even if it is somewhat opaque market. And again, people who've been watching it, the dominance of China and everything, very large issues at play here. And I'd point out to anyone listening, Rare Earth Salts based in the US, focusing on the downstream aspect, and then with what you're doing, focusing on the upstream and the supply, um, not to be taken for granted again, in as much as you say, finding buyers for these things is not, takes some care and attention, finding sources of supply as well, and a variety of different supply routes that can come in terms of processing and everything. Uh, and what you've done with seeking out the monazite, very impressive. And I wonder, is there any sense of any increased competition from other people trying to do similar things?
Well, so monazite, just for people listening, is a rare earth phosphate mineral. Um, it contains a good distribution of rare earths, including the magnet metals, and it fortunately is produced as a byproduct by the heavy mineral sands mining business that mine beach sands virtually and actually for the titanium and the zircon. And as they mine it and upgrade it and process it, they end up um, uh, extracting monazite sand, and that sand is something that we buy and then process. So it's an interesting and cheaper way to get into business, and obviously building a hard rock mine to mine and then beneficiate and extract rare earths from. So we just do that one piece of the business, the sourcing of the monazite sand, the processing of it, and the creation of a concentrate. So, but yeah, so there's a number of items to stitch together to make it all happen, and one of those being, of course, building the relationships with the heavy mineral sands miners who are interested in selling this material, albeit with some caveats. But they need to do some upgrading on their side. It's not that difficult, but there is work required. It's not just something they can just do instantly. So they've got to upgrade their material to create a high grade pure monazite sand concentrate that we look to buy, and then of course ship it to our facility. And we're looking to put a facility into North America as our first stage, and then we then will extract the rare earth concentrate from it. And right now monazite has been processed, historically, for 80 years or something, for its, at least probably for its rare earths.
Yeah.
There's a number of pathways and routes to do it, but today currently it's only really being done in India by the government and also in China as well by private industry.
So in terms of anyone coming in to scoop you, no indications as yet. Potential sources of supply for you remain at, in near term potential for you to source.
Source of monazite, yes. Well, the Chinese, not the Indians. The Indians have lots of monazite in India, so that's what they would process. The Chinese are looking to import monazite, and in some cases are importing monazite into China today.
Yeah.
But we see no reason we can't be price competitive with them, and given the current economics in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And do it outside of China. One of the interesting things about monazite is contains thorium and a little bit of uranium, so it is in a sense it's slightly radioactive and needs to be managed, treated, and handled with care. So that creates a bit of an opportunity and a challenge, because some of the larger companies that we're dealing with would prefer not to send it to China and not be quite sure what happens with the radioactive material from it.
Indeed. And again, coming back to Saskatchewan in Canada, what a place to send it.
Yeah, it's a bit counterintuitive. I mean, it's a long ways away from most of the beaches where monazite is mined, but
it's the expertise and the knowledge and the infrastructure around dealing with radioactive material. That's very significant.
It is, yeah. And not only do they deal with it every day, they've dealt with it safely for 40 or 50 years, and they've got all the technical expertise. They've got the mineral processing expertise, health and safety, all the elements that one is looking for, really.
Well, and it's funny to hear you speak about, things for 40, 50 years and even beyond that, the history of rare earths from monazite, 80 years, I believe you said. And it's, everyone's so excited about what's the potential growth, demand side, and big concerns, question marks around the supply, being able to meet it. What kind of a price will clear the market? All these questions that um, people get excited about when they're speculating and looking at what could happen here. To me, it's just interesting to hear again that as much as there's a lot of change and new stuff coming in this space, to be, on some firm footing, um, in what you're speaking of here, Don. It's again very important.
Yeah, the indications on the demands for the rare earth market are terrific at the moment, um, and it's a lot of it's being driven by the demand for the magnet metals, permanent magnets, rare earth permanent magnets, which are about 10 times stronger than a standard iron magnet you would have played with as a kid, and they're required, in fact, essential for the new for electric vehicle motors now. Basically all the new electric vehicles have permanent rare earth magnet motors. What's interesting is that companies like VW, in response to things like its problems in the diesel area, are now committing to dozens and dozens of electric vehicle models, and they don't. I'm not quite sure where they're going to get all the magnet material for it, quite frankly. So, those models aren't going to ship for a few years, but they've got to be thinking about that right now. I'm sure they are.
Well, I hope they are. I, we wonder. I wonder how many people might be surprised by what could play out here. Um, Taking for granted again the ability to source whatever you might need, uh, and challenging that and putting that into question. There's so many aspects to that story. Some info out, news coverage, one particular piece, in September, and it's just shocking to read the quote, that the U.S. puts tariffs on and then they remove them, and China has put some in response and hasn't quite removed them yet. The potential for things to get out of sync there, and the trade wars aspect of it all. It's kind of concerning to have all that at play. Not really the stuff that you want to base most of your investment decisions on, because they're such big trends and they take so long to play out. You really have to make sure it's, with these junior mining companies, that there's somebody there ready to exploit the macro opportunity, and not clear. Um, and again, to you guys having been working on this for years now and to be making progress at this time, fortuitous.
Yeah, I think the timing is really good. There's been, as most people may recall, that rare earths had a few years, sort of 2010 through 2012, where it was a very hot commodity. The prices skyrocketed in part due to concern about supplies from China. Prices of some rare earths went up 10 times, in fact, in that period of time. And then since then, there's been sort of a long bear market of prices have kind of come back down to sort of a more of a stable base, well below their highs, but above the previous base set before the boom. And it's clear to everybody that China's going to continue to use rare earths as a strategic resource. In fact, it's a sort of a pillar of their industrial internal strategy, to attract car makers and other manufacturers to China in order to make sure that they can access the resources they need, the key resources. One of them being rare earths is difficult to find, mine, process, and get to finished products. And that's where the Chinese have long had kind of an advantage, in part because of byproduct production, and have used it as for strategic advantage and are going to continue to do it. And nowadays, with electric vehicles becoming much more important, some people are kind of missing the fact that China is already the world's biggest EV market. In fact, half the EVs sold are sold today in China. It's not married to the petroleum economy and the automobile economy of internal combustion like Europe and North America are. So the government is providing incentives for production of electrical and new energy vehicles, they call them. So that could be hybrids or hydrogen cars or whatever, but it's all more advanced forms of transportation, all of it cleaner. And they'd love the Chinese companies to dominate those industries in the future. And of course, with new technologies, it allows them to leapfrog ahead. So these things are all kind of playing out at once, and it's creating some very interesting dynamics and quite positive for us being a potential producer outside of China. So we're quite like the macro backdrop at the moment here. It's quite interesting for us and positive.
Yeah, and it's seemed to heat up a little bit lately, but it's always hard to tell. Some strength in rare earth prices apparently in 2017, and I've heard some more interesting comments about what we've seen this year, showing not rising prices associated with a wild bull market or anything quite yet, but strength again, and subtle aspects of this market, right? This is not exchange traded stuff. I wonder if there will be in the future, maybe in China or somewhere else in the world, or if the rare earths will just kind of stay niche and smaller quantities, that it's not going to become exchange traded stuff.
Yeah, they'll ever be exchange traded, and the reason is not really the size of the market. Part of being exchange traded requires a full standardization of a product, be it tin or copper or cobalt or nickel or whatever. A large market, plus it needs a standard, commodity to trade. And in the case of rare earths, because there's so many of them and the specification is different, it could be 2 nines of purity, so that would be 99%, or 3 nines, which would be 99.9%. And there's about, at least 6 or 7 that are commonly traded. There's a lot of different specifications. So it's unlikely it would be exchange traded ever, or at least in what I can foresee.
Yeah.
And the prices that are quoted, from the metal services are very accurate, and nobody disputes those. So it's pretty easy to get a good fix on the pricing and as well as the size of the market, albeit, a little more complex than other markets. But it continues to be kind of that China factor that plays in. What is interesting as well, though, is even though probably, I don't know, maybe 70 or 80% of the rare earths trade on sort of longer term contracts, although the price may float the contracts for longer terms. I see these length of the terms of these contracts probably increasing. If you think about windmills or automobiles,
yeah,
those designs happen, 3, 4, 5 years ahead of shipment. So they need to lock down prices for long periods of time as the models are active, and that's gonna tighten the industry, certainly, and probably ensure a long-term stability of production, of consumption, and of pricing, actually. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. And I think the game is kind of very early. It's only about 140,000 ton a year marketplace. It's $5 billion a year. But looking forward, 10, 15 years, it'll probably be 10 to 15 billion dollar a year market, and still dominated by the magnet business. And we'd like to get a little piece of that.
Amazing to think that such an important piece it could be, what is relatively small, right? Talking, looking 10 years out and maybe 10 plus $billion total value traded annual basis. That's for such an important piece of the, what the future looks like in technology. Always puzzling to me how small, how an important piece can be a small piece, in some of these, supply
Yeah.
chains.
Well, it's small at the, say, the number I quoted there today being, say, $4 or $5 billion a year. That's at the oxide level, which is kind of the, traded commodity level, if you will.
Yes.
There's a lot of visibility into. But if we talk about the magnets being the standard usage, it has to go from being an oxide, then somebody's got to convert that to a metal, then somebody else has to convert that to an alloy, then somebody else has to convert that to a magnet material input, then somebody else turns that into a magnet itself. So there's, an extra four or five companies in between, even before it gets to, say, a motor maker that would insert it into a motor for an EV. And then from there, it might go off to a car maker. So there's another, depending how the integration is, 4 or 5 steps before it gets there. So the Chinese manufacturing economy is, a few $1 trillion a year. Rare earths go into a lot of that. So it's essential to their economy, in effect, because it's even though the value of the oxide isn't that high, the ultimate value of all the things it influences and it's necessary to be a part of is a huge part of the economy. So that's why it tends to attract a lot of media attention and geopolitical interest, just because of that very important dynamic.
Fascinating stuff. Again, and to say it's a relatively small part of the final cost of the items that these typically go into. And the question is, imagine if it wasn't, if they didn't have it, right? The product's not going to be the same, whether it's a car with the windows going up and down or myriad other things, right? That's the way I always like to think about it. Like, imagine if it wasn't there, where would it be? And just starting with that, you get a sense for how essential this stuff is, and then thinking again about the cost relative to other items and others, how essential other stuff might be. There's a complicated calculus that goes into all that, trade-offs, and some of them can't be substituted, and that is one of the phrases that I've heard for the first time more so recently. It's been a question where, if, when, under what conditions, would and could other materials be found to do the same thing. And yeah, again, many questions to discuss there.
Yeah, the substitution is interesting. The certainly in the area of to carry on this magnet topic, we've sort of we're the largest rare earth market segment at this point in time. Is that the neodymium or NdPr, neodymium praseodymium, which is the essential for the rare earth magnets that are used in the EVs. There isn't going to be any substitution for or NdPr in those magnets anytime soon. I mean, I'm not saying somebody couldn't invent some new magnet technology, but the NdPr magnet technology was invented 25 years ago and is now just becoming the standard in a whole variety of segments. So, something new may replace it ultimately, and if somebody, if it could be done with some cheaper substitute material, then that might take over. But it's difficult to foresee that, and big companies don't make these decisions quickly or lightly, and there's no imminent threats of substitution at all. So So that's sort of one of the areas. But there's always new technologies and things. The interesting thing about rare earths is, frankly, that they're discovering new and more interesting uses for them all the time in esoteric areas, because they're doping agents. And so universities and think tanks and research institutes are coming up with all sorts of new uses. So I would expect actually their use to increase over time,
Yeah.
not decrease, even though they're used in very small quantities for having significant effects. So
Well,
it's
and
really an exciting place to be.
certainly, I wonder about the potential for increased usage of rare earths other than the NdPr suite there for for other purposes too, and watching some of the demand, watching the potential for that demand to come on in other elements there. Um, Lots of tough questions around the economics of any one particular project and which suite of elements it produces, and the production levels versus the revenue drivers. Um, some gather overproduction of a lot of rare earths, um, based on the way that they're produced and relative, so to get enough of the NdPr that the global economy is really needing right now, um, associated with overproduction of some of the others.
Yeah, so no, it's a good point. I mean, cerium, for example, is the most abundant rare earth in the Earth's crust. And pretty well most large-scale mines and mining operations, and including our processing, would typically produce, cerium of around 35 to 40% by volume. And the market really can't consume all the cerium that's out there today, so it gets stockpiled and it gets sold off cheaply and that kind of thing. So it's kind of a loss leader for most of the companies, but they produce it whether they want to or not, because it's one of the rarest, and the rarest always come out together. So people are after, in terms of the demand and meeting the supply, they're after the magnet materials right now. But that wasn't always the case. You could have picked up quite a few years ago neodymium for $5 a kilo, and now it's $50 a kilo. So, and you could have had as much as you wanted at $5 a kilo. But people didn't foresee it, and things changed. So, but all the rare earths have all quite often very unique and distinctive attributes, and they're finding new uses for them. So the individual, really, it's kind of like looking at there being 6 or 8 or 10 different markets, in terms of supply and demand dynamics. And how that influences them. So it's interesting. And of course, when people are developing new applications, they're quite sensitive to how there may be a limited supply of that particular rare earth if they need it in large quantities, and it just may not be available. So it would prohibit certain technologies from coming to market just for that very reason.
And you mentioned cerium, and for people who've been watching your company for a while, some mention in prior news and management discussion analysis of quarterly financials there about some of the plans going forward, potential to monetize some aspects of the cerium, a variety of ways it seems for you to make money. And how does this news today fit in with all of that?
Yeah. So the two dominant rare earths in terms of by volume would be lanthanum and cerium. Lanthanum, and they're both priced about the same. They're both priced about $2 a kilo. Lanthanum, though, it's easy to sell. Sell as much as you make, you can usually sell, because it's in big demand for catalyst market, battery market, fuel cracking catalysts. The cerium, as I mentioned earlier, was a little more difficult to sell all that's produced. One of the things that we did in our test work was extracted the cerium directly from the hydrometallurgical stage, and produced a magnet-rich rare earth concentrate. So more of all of the other rare earths and very little cerium in it, and that increases the value of the rare earth concentrate that we produce. So depending on the demands from the marketplace, and that we could produce a cerium depleted rare earth concentrate at a lower cost, and it would create a valuable concentrate. And so there's different sort of economic models we can play off on depending on how that plays out. So interesting kind of leverage we've got at the hydromet stage of development here.
Well, and Saskatchewan again, and rare earth salts again. Some aspects of the story that make it clear, in the next. Did you say, is there a mention of timelines in this news release as well? Weeks or months? No, not quite.
Well, in terms of what aspect?
Plans going forward, production timelines and such.
Yes, rare earth salts is right now they're processing to about 500 tons per annum of rare earth oxide output.
Yep.
That should be completed relatively quickly, within a few months here, and then they plan to increase that with customer demand up to 3,500 tons per year of production output by 2022, and they're looking for us to be a significant supplier of that feedstock to get to that kind of that 3,500 tons per year output. And they are working with large multinational companies as well as government bodies to provide rare earths to get that capacity. And they're seeing a lot of demand as they mentioned in the news release in that quote from the industry for the magnet metals.
And this in a global market, 150,000 total rare earth oxide global production approximately.
Yes, I think I said 140,000, 140, 150,000, something like that, Peter. Exactly.
Yeah.
So they, they would be, what would that be? 2%, maybe 2% of the global marketplace at that 3,500 tons. So certainly enough for people to pay attention. Certainly nothing that's going to affect the marketplace as a production.
Yeah. Well, and something that will affect your company and theirs, whether or not it affects the market.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, there's so few companies that produce rare earths around the world. As soon as you're in production of any reasonable quantities, then everybody knows you, and that kind of league, because you've got the ability to then deal with all customer, suppliers, and everybody on a different level than when you're just proposing to do it.
And to that, the future of Medallion. Do we have a sense what might be coming?
Well, what we're doing now is we've got a bit more test work to do in terms of our process in the Saskatchewan Research Council. So look forward to that. Not a significant amount, but we've got to finalize some more things. The key work is out in the public and complete now, which being producing a commercial product that's viable for separation by a partner, which we announced today. Creation of a byproduct as a phosphate product, and then there's waste stream valorization and production to sort through. So that little bit of work that needs to be done. There'll be some news forthcoming on that.
Yep.
Thereafter, we expect some news from rare earth salts on acquiring customers themselves. So getting to announce specific commercial contracts. They may be named, they may not be named, but either way, we'll get a good indication of the volumes and the product areas that they look for the material in. and lastly, on the feedstock arrangements from our side, so dealing with the heavy mineral sands miners and acquiring the monazite sand for processing. So once our process work, all that news flow is anticipated, and once our metallurgy work is done, then we're in a position to get some definitive numbers on capital expenditures for a plant and operational costs, and so then we'll be able to provide some more specific economics on the process. So I can say, well, we wouldn't be going down this path unless it didn't look very attractive. It looks very attractive, and look forward to providing more color on that as we get the news out and provide the details.
Yeah, wonderful. And news today, confirmation that your partner has been able to separate. And so maybe not a surprise to any of the people familiar with the space and the story, the two companies here, but still something that marks significant progress on that path towards unlocking that value there.
Yeah. There's a lot of steps that need to be taken, but this is a critical, important milestone, and it shows we're on the right path with all of our test work and economic work as well.
Yeah, great. And always questions about the economics and things, but I wonder, looking back, timelines with rare earth salts. Was there any information around how long it took for them to do this?
Well, unfortunately, fortunately for us, from just a news flow perspective, they were moving their labs from one location to another. So there was a lot of tear down and moving and setting up of the labs to get to a point where they could test our concentrate. I think the actual work was just a couple of weeks of work in their labs to do the separation. Once it gets to a full plant, I think the material is probably going to spend about the same amount of material in the plant until it's all fully separated. Yeah. But that depends on the circuit paths the rare earths need to take, and it's a complex complex set of pipes to do all of that. And of course, we'll be shipping, on a commercial basis, we'll be shipping hundreds of tons at a time to rare earth salts for their processing.
Imagine that. And
yeah, and to highlight $20,000 a ton of separated rare earth oxides, and that would be the associated value. So it doesn't take many tons to be a lot of valuable material. So.
Certainly. And the process here, again, despite the resting times and the pipes and everything, it's not solvent extraction too, right?
No, I mean, rare salts has a different process. These are variant of electrowinning, a patented process, and they're world leaders in this area. It's cleaner and cheaper than solvent extraction, so we're thrilled to have them as a business partner, because they're really leading the pack in the rare separation race, it looks like.
Yeah. And them as a private company, there's a bunch of questions that come up, right? People who may not be familiar with who they are and what they're doing. They do have some presence online and have been somewhat forthcoming with some news items too on their website. So it's hard to say, with private companies, quite what's going on and what they might be involved with, critical materials, the political importance of all this stuff, again, very profound. And to that, even I wonder about you guys in Saskatchewan, again, the potential to access other sources of funding expertise. The Saskatchewan Research Council has been an example of that. Again, imagine if you didn't have access to that group and their ability to provide high-tech services at effectively at cost. The economics of what you guys would be facing on your development pathway would be different. I think it would be more expensive and potentially slower. So again, good work and ability to find the way, opportunity in the midst of all the winds of change there.
Yeah, we're happy to be really focused on North America now, where we've got the expertise in Saskatchewan at the Research Council. We've got lots of places that we could process the material and expertise to do it. We've got the nowadays with the Trump administration in power, especially a lot of demands and inquiries from the defense establishment, because rare earths are strategic and are used in a number of defense applications. So there's a lot of heightened awareness of this opportunity, if you will, for production in North America on a byproduct basis. And so people are there's a lot of attention coming, and there's a lot of attention under the surface, and I think, and people can certainly see it in the media in terms of rare earths, but I think we're in a good position to make a splash and show people a great pathway to get to production that that people hadn't really considered much. And as soon as I think there's a bright light on it and people see it, they'll go, wow, that's kind of neat and makes sense. And, probably say, why didn't anybody else do that? And I'll say, well, it was there, it was sitting there. You just had to do it.
And that's it, right? That's what it is with these exploration junior mining companies. In one way or another, their mandate is to go and find those opportunities that other people have missed or haven't seen yet, and exploit them, bring them to market in some way. It's taken years too for Medallion here, since that last bull run, as you mentioned there, with that mania bubble pricing, whatever it was there. It's coming on. It's not quite 10 years, but it's not that far away, right? And 10 years on from that mark, you could be a real, in production there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we in Medallion initially got involved in the rare earth marketplace as one of those exploration companies at that period of time. We happened to have a really smart CEO at the time that knew a lot about rare earths, and so he had very good strategies around it. And we did explore some hard rock opportunities, but also started to focus on the monazite byproduct side of it, and really have moved with that. And that's really proved to be the right thing for the company to do. And now, as time goes on, it gets clearer and clearer that it's a terrific opportunity. Yeah. And I think it will make a big difference in the rare earth space over the next few years here. So, it's
tough in comparison. Well, and in comparison to the guys who are generating, drill results and news, it would seem like this is slow and boring or something like that. But look closer, there's the potential for some real wild stuff to happen here as well, as we know. So.
Absolutely, and we've been at it for a long time, so it's if anybody else wants to do it, they're going to be playing catch up. So
yeah, and that to me is important, right? Because there's a lot of stuff here, and I find it kind of difficult to wrap my head around it all and figure out what is important, really, macro, micro, everything in between. And so looking for, opportunities and ways to speculate around what could happen here, knowing that you guys have been doing this for a while now and sticking with it, people wonder if it's worthwhile. But that's a choice you can make. And as I say, I'm bullish and I vote with my feet. So continue to pay attention to what's going on here. And Again, I find, markets so fascinating, and there's so much information, and a lot of aspects. The stories are kind of very familiar, clear enough, but the stuff going on with the rare earths, there seem to be some of the best analysts that I've encountered consistently, talking publicly about what's happening and what could happen. There are some good facts out there and good analyst reports, which is, essential to attract interest and help bring some of the bigger players in the global materials industries, into this small niche space. To that, I wonder the market cap of Medallion today, approximately $5-10 million.
No, today we're probably $4 million Canadian. So
$4 million.
Yeah, I was talking to an analyst at UBS, the big Swiss group. He was out of Australia, and he'd written a report on Linus and asked us, what our approach was. And I walked him through it, and he was like, "Well, that's really interesting and exciting, but you're only $4 million. What can you do about that?" I go, "What can you do about that?" What happened was the rare earth capital ran away from the rare earth story before our story got that interesting, and so we've been just building the basics here at this point in time, and so I've had a number of people look at us recently and look at how undervalued we are compared to some other companies they look at, so looking for explanations and wondering if they've got something wrong, and I go, "No, you don't have it wrong. Your thinking is sound." Okay, there you go. So so it's kind of one of those disconnects in the marketplaces you see from time to time, and probably more often in the junior space than in big caps. But hey, here we are, and that's why I'm kind of excited about the opportunities in front of us.
Yeah, wonderful. And cash on hand and everything like that, those become really the questions for a junior is, are you able to keep going and doing the work? I think the recent history gives a pretty clear answer to that, a definitive yes.
Yeah, we continue to raise money in small amounts to move the project forward, and so we manage a very low burn company at this point in time, as it's really a business development exercise and test work and that kind of thing. So a lot of the expensive things have already been done, and as we hit the milestones and capital is available, we expect to probably raise more amount, larger financings at higher prices, and press forward from there. So in the meantime, just kind of get the word out and press forward.
Yeah, certainly. Well, thank you for taking the time to speak with me here today, Don.
Yeah, my pleasure, Peter, as always.
Till next time. Goodbye.
Alrighty, bye-bye.